There are 3 books which I would attribute to me overcoming addiction, and 2 of the books, which are heavily based on neuroscience, Never Enough by Judith Grisel and Dopamine Nation by Anna Lemke, are what I've been collecting so we can dissect and learn lessons from today, so you can beat your addiction once and for all. Essentially, these 2 books highlight that we are cacti in a rainforest. Cacti are designed to grow in barren environments, and it's exactly the same with our brains. Our brains are not accustomed to the access we have at any time, anywhere, any place for anything that we want. They're just not used to it. But this is the world we live in, so we need to arm ourselves, because in this battle, knowledge is power. You probably remember learning in high school biology that our bodies are always searching for homeostasis, and it's the same with our brains, and it does so by being a contrast detector. Most of the time we experience neutrality and monotony within our environments, and then every so often we'll encounter something new that will spark a neurochemical change in our brain's reward circuits. For example, maybe a new opportunity for food, drink, or sexual opportunity. Here you can see how this would benefit our species evolutionarily, because if the opposite were true and everything in our environment was neurochemically stimulating, then nothing would be worth pursuing. It's like highlighting every sentence in a book. Everything is important, therefore nothing becomes important. This homeostatic element of the brain allows us to detect what is good and bad, because then we contrast those things in our environment with the neural okayness and monotony that we feel most of the time. And getting deeper into the neuroscience, all addictive behaviors are addictive because they stimulate the mesolimbic dopamine system in our brains. When something catches your interest in your environment, there are 2 circuits kind of at play here. Number 1, dopamine is released in the nucleus accumbens, and then when dopamine is released in the nigrostriatal pathway, that is what motivates us to actually take action either towards or away from this thing. So now we've nerded out a little bit, let's get to the juicy details. Have you ever heard of the saying, what goes up must come down? Yeah? Well, it doesn't just apply to you chopping your nuts off and throwing them up in the air, it also applies to addiction as well. This concept is explored in both books and it's called the pleasure-pain balance, and Judith Grisel refers to it as the no free lunch rule. For every action there is an equal opposite reaction in order for the brain to return to homeostasis. Any prolonged or repeated departures from hedonic or affective neutrality have a cost. What does this mean in everyday life? For example, if you've been scrolling on YouTube for 3 hours, during the activity you feel engaged, entertained, connected, but as soon as you stop, your dopamine levels are below baseline, where you go into a dopamine deficit state, if we imagine that this is homeostasis, and everything that you feel when you stop is exactly the opposite of what you felt when you were engaging in that activity. For example, you feel irritable, lonely, unfocused. But the benefits that drugs confer will have to be paid back. There are 2 key points here. Firstly, we must recognise that when we're engaging in an addictive behaviour, we're not doing so because we necessarily want to do that activity. We're doing so because we want to escape the pain we feel through withdrawal from that activity. So the coffee drinker doesn't drink coffee to feel alert and focused. She does it because she wants to escape the feelings of anxiety and jitters. The YouTube addict doesn't watch YouTube to feel entertained. He watches it to avoid the feeling of boredom and pain when he's away from the screen. Therefore, before we engage in a potentially addictive behaviour, we have to ask the question, what is the cost of undertaking this behaviour? Because there is no free lunch. Every pleasure you engage in will have to be paid back. Dysphoria-driven relapse, when the pain of withdrawal causes one to relapse. Listening to that, you may have noticed some particular themes, and one major one is pain, either the feeling of it or the desire to escape it. Pain has 2 purposes. Number 1 is to avoid something that could be potentially dangerous. Number 2 is to promote the process of healing if we've ignored the first lesson. But this is the thing, this habit that you've developed has probably been garnered over 5, 10, 7 years, a long time. So what we need to do is engage our prefrontal cortex to engage in top-down processing of our brain so we can unlearn these addictive behaviours and then directly replace them with more beneficial habits. And in this next part, we're going to learn exactly how to do this. It is not heroin, alcohol, nicotine, or cocaine that makes one an addict. It is the drive to escape from reality. First of all, you need to discover how addicted you actually are. So, ask yourself this question. Just a quick one from me and then we'll get straight back to the video. I've just noticed that 82.5% of you guys who watch the channel haven't subscribed yet. So if you like this channel and you're enjoying this video, a subscribe and a like really helps the channel. Like, really helps the channel. And lastly, here's the deal I'll make with you. After you subscribe and like, I will dedicate myself to making these videos as informative, as concise, and as excellent as they possibly can be. Sound fair enough? Let's get back to the video. Now let's dive into the number one thing that helped me, which is from the book Dopamine Nation, and it is called the dopamine acronym. D stands for data. Here you want to get clear on what the addiction actually is and how it affects your life. So for example, for me, the addiction was excessively using YouTube and pornography. The effect that it had on my life was bad. O stands for objectives. Every addiction serves a purpose. So what objective is this addiction serving for you? For me, it was providing escape from my reality. It was providing a feeling of connection that I was lacking socially in my life. And it made me feel like I was resting. P, problems. What are the problems of continued use over time? For me, continued use would be worsened relationships. I wouldn't be nowhere near as productive in the things that I wanted to do. My mental health would be absolutely terrible and I would probably want to kill myself. A stands for abstinence, and this is the most important point. You have to remove this thing from your life. Like I said earlier, you've hit rock bottom or you're close to hitting rock bottom because you've been using this thing so much. You've been like a monkey in a cage, just pressing the pleasure button. You need to refrain from that thing so your dopamine levels go back up to baseline. You know the frequent stories addicts usually say about how when they quit the addictive behavior, normal things become pleasurable in life. They look at a bee pollinating a flower and they're like, oh my god, the reason why they now appreciate that thing in contrast to before is because their dopamine levels are back up to homeostatic baseline. They're not absolutely drained and irritable and coming out the arse end of their addiction. And if you're ambivalent about whether you actually have the addiction, removing it will give you a good gauge on whether you are addicted to it, because if you remove it and then it doesn't affect your life too much, just carry on, that's fine. But if you remove it and you notice you feel a big loss in your life, then that's when we need to go into the next few steps. M stands for mindfulness. Here you want to be with the pain, because if you are addicted and you abstain, you want to abstain minimum for 14 days. That seems to be the benchmark whenever I've listened to podcasts and stuff about this. The first 2 weeks, depending on the severity of your addiction, are going to be absolute hell. Your brain is literally rewiring, so the pain that you will feel will be quite intense. For some people, they say it takes 2 days, takes a week, takes 2 weeks. Never really heard someone say it takes maximum than 2 weeks unless you're a raging heroin addict. But you need to be present with the pain and understand that the more pain you feel, the better it is, because the way you can frame it is your brain is literally rewiring. So after the 2 weeks, you're going to be so much more energetic and well off. I, insight. Channel the feedback that you're getting from the withdrawal and how it's changing your life. For example, when you start to notice that you do have a better appreciation for things, or when you're in a conversation with someone and you're more present and you can listen to them attentively, note that down. Oh, I noticed this today. Things are working. You want to be attentive to those micro moments that you can celebrate. N, next steps. What is the plan after your 2 weeks or 30 days of abstinence? Are you going to reintroduce this thing back into your life? Whether it's Instagram, YouTube, pornography, get rid of. Absolutely. Do not introduce it. Get rid of it forever. But with social media, maybe you want to start using it for 10 minutes a day at a particular time. Or maybe you've realised that you don't need it at all. E, experiment. Similar to the last point, if you do want to reintroduce this thing back into your life, then you're probably going to do it in a trial and error process where you might think checking it just once during the day might be beneficial, but then you realise you need to check it twice during the day because you need to respond to messages. Experiment with it. You remember earlier how I said for every feeling of pleasure there is an equal and opposite feeling of pain? It also works in reverse. For every feeling of pain you voluntarily expose yourself to, depending on the pain, you'll feel an equal and opposite feeling of pleasure. Cold showers are a great example of this because they boost your dopamine levels by like 250%, which is brilliant if you're in a dopamine deficit state. Hard choices, easy life. Easy choices, hard life. What if instead of seeking oblivion by escaping from the world, we turn toward it? What if instead of leaving the world behind, we immerse ourselves in it? Also, upon the point of pain, we need to embrace the inevitable feelings of boredom and dullness that we experience in everyday life. There are some brilliant videos on YouTube highlighting how you can outwork everyone by being bored, because it increases your creativity and productivity. And if you really want to kick this addiction and go through the abstinence stage successfully, you have to be comfortable with being uncomfortable. I really cannot stress this enough. You have to be okay being bored, and you have to feel the pain. There's no other way to overcome this. We cannot change what we're unwilling to face. Now, in a paradoxical way, boredom has actually become a real source of pleasure for me. Whereas before I would try to escape it, it's now an opportunity for deep thought and contemplation. Another great point is exercise. Studies showed that rats which were forced to exercise 6 weeks before cocaine exposure took less cocaine. We all know the importance of exercise. It's incredible. And it's a brilliant example for tapping into the pain side of the pleasure-pain balance to then feel the endorphins of pleasure after, which are very long lasting. Environment is a key factor. Build a life you're not trying to escape from. There's been a lot of study of addiction into the indigenous peoples of America, because alcoholism is rife among Native Americans. And many scientists thought that there's got to be a genetic component, but no one could find anything until they realized if your culture has pretty much been destroyed and you live on a ranch, drinking kind of seems excusable. So what really helped me was moving to another city within the UK. Now, you might not have the funds to do that if you really want to get over this addiction, but you've got to change things in your environment and kind of reset your brain so you can start afresh. If you're staying in your room, rearrange it. Start looking at the things in your room. I'm in my mum's garage at the moment, but start looking at things in your room and in your environment as a call for your attention. Is it a good call or is it a bad call? Because the main difference between people who are disciplined and people who aren't is disciplined people don't rely on infinite resources of willpower to do things. They have their environment set up, so doing the beneficial tasks are easier to do than engaging in addictive behaviours. Another point, discovering your values is key, and probably a bit of a weird one that you don't hear about in the addiction realm. I remember around 2.5 years ago, I was sat in my old room and I was just fed up. I think I had oblivion watched YouTube, probably watched porn or something, and I thought, right, enough is enough. I'm going on a bike ride. And I began speaking to myself out loud. This was at a real change point after I had gone to therapy and all of this stuff and done a lot of introspection work, and I was thinking, right, something's got to give. And I began speaking to myself. It was a big ramble. Then I realised one key thing. Watching pornography was in direct opposition to all of my values. So why would I engage in it anyway? My values of commitment, family, discipline, strength, rapport with people, bringing out the best in others, is in direct opposition to all of those. Then it became a very easy decision to not engage in it. Another incredible point from Andrew Huberman: one of the best ways to replace a bad habit with a good one is, as soon as you engage in the bad habit that you want to change, immediately after perform a good habit. Keep it consistent because you want to replace the bad with the good. So every time you mindlessly go on the internet, get off your phone, get off your laptop, instantly do 10 press-ups. Key point, connection. As we grapple to respond to the growing population of addicts, we'll do well to recognise that disordered use comes from, thrives in, and creates alienation. This means that building walls to keep us from our emotions or our neighbours will only make things worse by feeding the epidemic. If there's one theme through my story of change, it's connection. The one thing I was searching for when I was watching YouTube to oblivion, the one thing I was looking for when I was using pornography, was connection. In the midst of addiction, I felt disconnected. What I've replaced that with is genuine friendship. Moving to a new city where my social realm has expanded so much. Addiction creates alienation, where you feel like you're this lone wolf who has to deal with it all alone. You're screaming for connection. That's what you truly need. The opposite of addiction isn't sobriety, it's a meaningful life, connection and autonomy. That's what it is. So the key tip here, after you've gone through the abstinence, then think about the type of life that you want to build. Of course, there's many angles that we can tackle here, and there's a lot of angles which we could go off into other videos about, like life design and all of that, which will come soon. But really think about your values, what type of life you would want to live as well, and the type of person you want to be for the others in your your life, be that person, and then build your social group, connect with people who want the best for you and who will also keep you accountable as well. Another point, get your story straight. This was mainly from Anna Lemke in Dopamine Nation. She realised through her experience of being a psychotherapist that the more people tell their stories from the angle of them being a victim, the worse their mental health and the worse their emotional regulation as well. Get your story in order. Another point, change Gremlins for Autopilots. This is from another book called The Chimp Paradox. If you've noticed this piece of paper here, this is what I was doing last night, just to keep myself attentive, because we can always fall back into the slope of addiction at any point. A gremlin is a negative thought and an autopilot is a positive thought that you want to replace the gremlin with. So one thing that sometimes I struggle with is if I wake up late, not on time, I then convince myself that that is an excuse to waste the whole day. So the gremlin would be, I woke up late. That excuses mindless consumption. What I want to change it for, the autopilot is, so this would be me standing up after I've woken up late and not wanting to spunk away the rest of the day. I cannot change the past, but I can make this moment a win. All of a sudden that shifts the programming in my brain to be like, I can focus on what I can do now. Another gremlin in my mind is I need to mindlessly rest. Sometimes I feel like I need to watch mindless YouTube because I'm tired and you know the weekend's here and I need to relax. I need to mindlessly rest. I choose to rest away from screens because doing so makes me happy. And in summary, before we end, because hopefully this has been really valuable for you, what I want to emphasize is I'm not saying the internet is a bad thing. I just hope that we can arm ourselves with the knowledge needed in order to use it in a more positive way so we can use it and it doesn't use us. What we're talking about here is almost a half monk, half digital use lifestyle where we use technology for an intention and for a purpose and we glean the benefits from it, but then the other time we're in a half monk mode where we tap into the meditation and the solitude and the boredom and the wonders of life beyond screens. To end, here are some activities you can replace with tech use. Walking, listening to audiobooks, listening to podcasts, one hobby of your choice, spending time with other people, reading, silence, meditation, cold exposure, breath work. Get your schedule in line, stick to it and give yourself a reason to wake up in the mornings. Solitude, exercise and cooking are both good ones. The opposite of addiction, I have learned, is not sobriety but choice. I really appreciate your time and attention. I hope this was valuable enough as it has been valuable for me to collect these notes. If you want the notes that I've made for this video, let me know in the comments. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribe and like. Of course, you know the deal. And I'll see you in the next one. Adios, muchachos.